So, good evening. This video tonight is going to be a two-part video. The first part is just what you're seeing right now with me talking about two topics. And this video should be of interest of any person who has acquired say like a 70s or 80s or even to a certain extent 90s model Mercedes-Benz, and you have it in a running condition, or you're trying to get it to run, and you want to maintain this, say, like for at least another 5 to 10 years. That is going to be the main target group. If you're just trying to restore a car or get a car running to sell it, this video is probably not really of interest to you. But those people who are interested in long-term ownership, they will be interested in it. And this will be the second part. Is the topic there is going to be the availability of parts. And the primary topic there is going to be Bosch, because Bosch is really the predominant part supplier on these vehicles for a wide variety of electrical, electromechanical, and electronic components in these vehicles. And so I'm going to explain this of why and what they're doing and what they're not doing, because I got some feedback back out of Europe from Bosch headquarters on this, and the Bosch people also updated both the US Bosch Automotive website, where you can now enter your old VIN numbers and they will show you available parts on there. I will explain that. And then the Bosch Classic website, which is run out of and operated out of Karlsruhe in Germany, on what they did is and how they structured the website now after 2 years of being up and running for the better part. And I will show you in the second part of this video on a laptop on how to maneuver through their website, especially Bosch Classics. The Bosch Automotive global website, US Global, is pretty self-explanatory, and you can pull up a list. I will show that too, for all the parts they had available, which are in the process of being currently deleted out of the assortment of available parts. And the interesting thing on the Bosch Classic side is the dates actually on when they stopped making those parts, so you can get an idea of what this actually looked like. But before we get started on the parts list, I wanted to say a few things about my car, which I purchased, or which was delivered. I purchased the vehicle on November 3rd, and it was delivered on November 12th, which is today, here in Bayshore, Kansas. And we couldn't get it started, so I picked it up from where the transport company left it. It is just a half a mile from here, on a little side street where he could come in with this big truck and offload it. And I picked it up there. We jump-started the car, and then I brought it over here to the house on the 13th. Now, this vehicle I have, if you watch my videos, you may know a little bit about the history. I'm the 6th owner of this vehicle. As of today, we have 345,200 odd miles. These are the official ones. The records in the Carfax database basically covers this time period, so there was no manipulation. The odometer didn't work when the vehicle got here, and from what I gathered from Carfax is it stopped working at the mileage, which was 330,403 miles in 2015. So, and I got the vehicle in 2020, so 5 years later. But the condition of the vehicle was such that the car had been sitting for a long time, and it was not used on a regular basis. The parts, the issues the car had, it came with, and so far and so on, basically verified this. The fifth owner was just a person who basically bought it in San Diego at one of these car auctions, dealer auctions, and he put it up on eBay for $750. He actually wanted to use it for himself. He owned the vehicle for 6 or 7 weeks, and he drove it a little bit. He said he didn't drive it very much because it wasn't starting right, and he had the alternator issue with the worn out voltage regulator and then all of the stuff, and he was not very knowledgeable about those things. He was 21, and he wanted to buy a car, so he had gone to this auction with a friend of his, and they wound up with this car. And of course, when you're 21, this is a pretty tough going, even for a seasoned Mercedes-Benz person, to get these vehicles back to a fully running condition where they're within factory specs in terms of performance and all of that stuff. So anyway, the lady who had owned the vehicle was, I think, a Hispanic lady in Los Angeles. She had bought the vehicle in 2008 with about somewhere between 225,000 to 250,000 miles. In that time period she was the third owner. He had bought in the vehicle to Mercedes-Benz of Los Angeles. And this is the time period, I suspect, around 2007, 2008, that the cylinder heads were not new cylinder heads, but what they did is they put new heads on there, but they transferred a whole bunch of parts on there to reduce the cost. And there was probably a chain failure at that point, or tensioner failure, the first one, and they fixed it. Now, that Hispanic lady then who bought that vehicle with that high mileage already from that fellow, from the third owner, experienced some failure around 2014, 2015. And her neighbor next to her fixes vehicles. It's like a shade tree mechanic, but it is a little bit more sophisticated than that. And it is that mechanic who did a lot of work on this vehicle. This is why the suspension and steering and all of the stuff was basically done at that point, somewhere around 2014, 2015, 2016. And they got the car to run. At this point, the second fuel distributor, which was on there, was still working. And it was that fellow who also put in the Fabi tensioner and the Fabi chain, which I took out 2 years ago. And probably because he looked at the mileage and he looked at the Mercedes-Benz message boards, and he probably had watched some of Kent Bergsma's videos, which talks about the catastrophic failure on those, and he changed that out and he put the new guide rails in. That's why they're still relatively wide. And so this is how this came. And then the car finally failed when that second fuel distributor Mercedes-Benz had put in, probably in the early 2000s, even before the third owner was put in, and that was a rebuilt one from Mercedes-Benz Bosch. That was basically died out on them, probably around 2016, 2017. By that time, the car was not driven. They went and they kept up the emissions control, the emissions test in California, because that gives you an entry at Carfax every time and the mileage. So you could see this. And then the car went to, the lady donated the vehicle to a non-profit in Los Angeles, which then winded up auctioning the car off. And the car was shipped from Los Angeles to the other auction site in San Diego. That is roughly in a nutshell. But the only reason that this vehicle, I was able to drive the vehicle for the last 3 years, is all the work and the parts the lady, as the fourth owner, put into this vehicle in that time frame since she got it from 2008 until about 2016, I would think. The car probably set then from 2016. They didn't renew the emissions control until the car was donated in March or April of 2020, and then wound up at San Diego at the auction in July of 2020. That's roughly the time frame in there. But that fellow who worked on that car, he did a lot of work to it. And they used on many areas Fabi parts and that sort of stuff. And they, from just sitting, had deteriorated by the time I got the car here, except for the suspension, because I had no other or no suspension work to do on this vehicle, except for the steering tie rod ends there in the front, which the fellow here at the car shop changed for me. Otherwise, the vehicle had not been worked on. It is like the vacuum pump wasn't working. You know, basically the entire fuel system had collapsed, and they had tried to do some work to it with putting the wrong fuel filter in there, and they got it somehow to work, but this was already a leaking fuel distributor in there. And so that big part of getting the vacuum leaks fixed in the engine intake system, and changing the starter out, which was the original starter on there with over 330,000 miles on it, and that kind of stuff, that's all what fell into my lap. And this is, so I would say I got pretty lucky for what I got for the money I paid and for the condition the engine is in. Looking at the mileage, but all the previous owners did all of that or had that work done and did quite some maintenance to it to keep it in a running condition. Of course, the engine doesn't run like a brand new engine with 1,000 or 5,000 miles, but it has a very low, vibration in it, which would be expected with a engine which has around 100, 150,000 miles on it. But it is not a falling apart engines after 330,000 miles, which has never seen a car mechanic, if the engine even would have lasted that long. And so if you're going to be interested in buying a vehicle like this, then you're probably gonna, it's a hit and miss with these things. Clay got lucky on his 450 SEL. And we caught the breakage of the guide rail for the chain guide rail just in time. Before we started the engine, I was highly suspicious of this, and I was correct. My instincts were correct on this, and we got it to work. It can also go in a different direction. Now, Monkey Wrench Mike, today is Sunday night. He posted a video yesterday on November 11th, where he went to the Copart lot, I believe, in Tulsa, and he featured a 560 SEC, a 1990, which still is in a very good shape. And I looked up the Copart listing, which had already ended at the point when he had posted the video, and it said that it had closed on Friday, the 10th of November, 2023. And it didn't tell me how much he paid for it or who bought it in the first place. But the vehicle came with an Oklahoma salvage title. It was advertised as running and driving, but with a salvage title. And when Monkey Wrench Mike started the vehicle, he kept saying there's some issues with the engine. The engine was idling fine at about 650, 750 in there. So no vacuum leaks or any of that stuff, but you could hear some distinct noises, sounds from the engine. And of course, he has a lot of experience with this stuff too. And if he bought it, I hope he can fix it. But you really don't know with these cars at these mileages, say like anytime over 75,000 miles, these engines are going to not fully perform anymore to factory specs, and you will have to start doing something. 75,000 miles is the point where the engine has about 50 to 75% of life left. That greatly depends on how the car is stored, parked, how often fluids are changed, how the person drives the vehicle. If you're driving like like a race car driver, and you're stepping on it and you're pushing it hard, hard, and hard, the engine will wear out and this transmission will wear out a lot faster. If you drive like I do, like an old man, then you probably won't even notice that there's some performance degradation in there. I assure you that most viewers who would sit in a vehicle with that kind of an engine in it, either the 4.2 or the 5 liter or the 3.8 or the 5.6 liter, that they wouldn't even know a degradation in engine performance on those at that mileage level. It is only when you put them on a test stand on a dynamo and you hook up all sorts of diagnostic equipment that this becomes actually visible, and you start to perform the tests on the fuel divider unit, on what the flow rate is actually, and on the equality of the flow rate between all cylinders, and the entire health of the fuel delivery system. And then the vacuum system, the valve springs are very, very important here too, to actually, to create the vacuum and to hold the vacuum properly, is when you have worn out valves and you don't replace, not worn out valves, but valve springs. Then that becomes a problem over time too, and it can cause quite an idle issue. And you can fix everything else, but if you haven't done anything with your valve springs and they're worn out and they're unequal, and that's a big problem with cars which sat for a long time, where the rocker arms hadn't been removed, so they were all in the same position, all close basically. They will wear, or they will take on the shape of the position they were in when the car was parked. And you leave a car sitting like this for 3, 5, 10 years, they're going to be all over the place. And so that is, and then the heat is going to change the behavior of the springs when the engine warms up. And then you either get a rough idle or shaky engine when it is warming up, or when it is warm. It can go in several different ways that can manifest itself. But it's usually when your engine is still a little bit shaky, and you know that it is worn out. And if it is very shaky, then it's most likely the valve springs, which need to be replaced, like it was on my car here. So that's why I noticed that they replaced the heads at 225,000, 235,000 miles, and they transferred the springs from the old header. So these springs were gone, which I had in there. They had 300 some thousand miles on them, and they had never been changed, and that kind of stuff. And so are the hydraulic compensating elements. They were moved over. When people usually work on these cars, I'm no exception to this. You're probably trying to salvage, especially on an expensive part like an engine head, is to carry over as many parts as you can at that point to reduce the overall cost, because that gets pretty expensive to do this. So that's kind of where I'm at. So it's a hit and miss with these things. I would say I got lucky, and I have to say, my hats off to that mechanic who worked on that for that lady from that time period from 2008 until 2020, early 2020. The effort and everything what they did on probably a shoestring budget, as being the fourth owner, and the mileage and everything on there, they did a pretty good job. I have to say this. There's some professional car repair shops which probably will do a more a worse job than this. This is actually good work what they did, and that's what saved the car itself, to keep it running today and having a justification to further spending money on it. So it is not going to become a write-off. So this will conclude now the part with my car here. Now, in reference to the parts situation in general, let me just start here. Mercedes-Benz, Bosch, Video, Hela, Siemens to a certain extent, they have been producing cars and car parts since about 1910. That is now 113 years ago, 114 years ago, with probably a disruption for automotive production, for regular automotive production from 1939 until about 1946, 1949, in that range, for about 6 years, 7 years. There was a shift because of the, political situation in World War II and everything what came with it. They have produced, I would say, Mercedes-Benz probably has easily produced over 200 to 300 different models just in the automotive section. Without trucks, without their four-wheel drive vehicles, the G model, or any of that stuff. Just automotive passenger cars and coupes and convertibles and roadsters and that sort of stuff, and limousines, since 1910. They probably have an assortment combined for these 300 cars or models, which goes probably over 5-6 million parts combined. If you take every car from 1910 until today, including the electric vehicles they're building now, I would say. So the logistics, the partial logistics is gigantic. It's enormous of what this has grown into. You start with 1 or 2, 3 models, you have a few hundred parts. As more models you got, as more parts you're going to get, even if you have commonalities in these parts. These cars demand, and as more we go in our most recent time, say like the last 25 to 40 years, as more specific the parts have gotten for each model. Where before you could share, parts between a 123, for instance, and a 126, or that kind of stuff, where it came from the 108, 109, 110, 111, this kind of thing, that has pretty much evaporated. Because the automotive producer like Mercedes-Benz, the main criteria for them right now is getting the parts totally available for vehicles 15 years and younger, with the highest priority of what they have currently in production, which is not a big deal because they have to buy these parts anyway. So they usually add parts to the stock in order to have spare parts, replacement parts. In this process, the way this normally works is Mercedes-Benz used to make all of the metal-related parts as long as they did not require any particular casting, outside castings for engine blocks, the rods, the piston rods, pistons, and the heads, and what is associated with the heads, basically. And the transmission. That's the parts they would cast, whatever casting needed to be done. They have the molds and everything that comes with it, and the exact composition of the alloys or metals used in this process. So they can, at Mercedes-Benz, if they need to, they can run a smaller production run in their foundries. And they can produce engine blocks, they can produce anything in that thing, from the transmissions, manual or automatic, from the differential to the engine itself and the engine block and the engine head, everything they can do. The same thing with oil pans and that stuff. They bought the gaskets from 3 or 4 different suppliers in Stuttgart, which would make them to the specification Mercedes-Benz gave them. I do not know if these companies who make those gaskets are still in business. I guess so. If Mercedes-Benz, the normal procurement process, there's some exceptions to the rules, but normally this works this way, is after a model has been discontinued, is that they go to the manufacturer. They usually retain the rights to the dies or to the forms and that sort of stuff. So Mercedes-Benz would have the dies to make to cut the gasket, to press them out of the gasket material. They can take the die, where they have the die, and they say they fit in this and this and this machine. They can be fitted into, the press, and they go and then they get a quote, and they say, well, we want 100, maybe we need 1,000 of those. There's not much demand there anymore. We're gonna make a small production run. Then they get a bid on those, and then they go with the lowest bidder, who can make it to the specifications they request, and they will send out the die, for instance, for the gasket. They make this, and the die and the gaskets are then back delivered to Mercedes-Benz. They inspect this, it goes into their pouches with their stickers on it, and it goes into the warehouse. Normally, in this sense, the manufacturer usually who makes that for Mercedes-Benz, they charge them a setup fee, because you have to get the die shipped from Mercedes-Benz over to their facility. They have to handle that thing that has to be installed in the machine. They're going to tie up the machine for this process. So it depends on how much time is involved in changing tools out. This can take a few minutes to several hours or days on some certain items. That is all calculated in there. So if Mercedes-Benz says we need 1,000 gaskets, and the manufacturer says that's going to cost us 5,000 euros to change the machine over, then you have already 5 euros in each gasket just in the time to change the machine over. Means putting the tool in and taking the tool back out. And then you have the regular production cost of the material and time and whatever they add to it and the profit to it. That's how this normally works. Some of these things can no longer be made like electronic parts because the semiconductor manufacturers have discontinued these parts completely. Primarily microcontrollers and now more and more increasingly through-hole parts and SMD parts. These are surface mount devices. These are the little tiny devices on the circuit boards which don't require a hole going through the board, but they can be soldered directly onto the pads. This stuff, what we had in the 70s and 80s, with a very few exceptions, have been pretty much obsolete for quite some time. And this has not affected Mercedes-Benz directly, but it has affected Bosch, for instance. To give you an example, is the ignition unit, the EZL units. And here, they discontinued those in 2003. I have the exact dates, and I will show this in the second part of this video on the computer, on when they were actually discontinued by Bosch, and it became no longer available. And so this is how this ripple effect takes through. So then Bosch says, well, we cannot really make it. Then you have on these electronic type levels, you're going to have a huge issue because you can now take the original software and put 1 or 2, 3 software engineers on there and reformat the code, most likely written in assembler because that's what we used back then, to fit onto a modern day, currently available microcontroller. But would be in this instance for the EZL unit, it was 16-bit microcontrollers from SEL or from Siemens, actually, made by Nixdorf Computers. And you could do this, but the cost then would be gigantic. You're probably looking at 100,000, €250,000 or something like this, just to get them up to date. Then you can go out and have the forms made. They still have probably the molding if they didn't throw them out or remelted them or whatever. The dies for the heatsink and for the cover unit which goes on there. Those could be remade, and then you can put a new circuit board in there with the same software from back then, but adjusted for the particulars of the microcontroller which is now being used. Very, very expensive undertaking. Can be done, and we're doing it right now with old military equipment and certain other industrial equipment which they have to have running. So these things are being converted over. It's a very expensive and time-consuming process. Mercedes-Benz says to Bosch, well, we really need maybe 250 of these units per year. You know, I bought a unit for my car, an EZL, which had a manufacturing date of 2003 when they were discontinued, meaning the one I have is the last batch Bosch made for Mercedes-Benz. This thing sat at Mercedes-Benz in Mannheim in their big climatized warehouse from 2003 until 2021 when I ordered it. So the thing has 17, 18 years of storage already on it. So the life performance of this thing is already degraded by about 30% for just sitting in a warehouse, even though climatized. Just so you get an idea of the scope of this whole thing. So I put it in and it's running fine, and it probably will run fine for another 5 or 10 years with no problems. If I need another one, I probably won't be able to get one. Then I have to see what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to worry about this because this is today. It is just to give you an idea what you're up against if you need to fix something or trying to find out and how to plan this out so your car keeps on running. I have a secondary unit here from eBay for $50 or something like this, which I can put in immediately should something happen to that unit. I can keep on driving. But to get a full, complete, brand new unit is no longer possible. They're gone. I got one of the very last ones they had, and they're not going to make it. That unit did cost me $680. Most people, they're going to say, wow, that's a lot of money for this thing. Yeah, it sure is. But if they were to make a new one, you probably look at $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 for one of these units if they're making 250 of them. For the cost, what that is going to take, like I said, is to convert them over. The costs are going to be gigantic, so they're not going to do it. And this is what I'm seeing more and more. The parts where there is a lot of tooling costs associated, meaning changeover tooling, or they have to make new toolings, or they would have to go through a labor-intense process to get the part updated to where they can use today's parts. They're all discontinued. And whenever they're going to run out of the supply, whatever's left, then that's going to be it. There's not going to be any more replenishment on those. Other parts, like these rubber-related hose parts for the air intake system, for the idle speed control, they can make those obviously. They're relatively cheap, $15 or $17 a piece. You're looking at $35, and like I said, it's the one I got now, worked since January, since I got them. So they fixed the issues. Those parts they can get, they got the tooling, they're cheap, and they can buy them in smaller quantities. There's no big fees or setup fees. That is the kind of products they're probably going to keep until they run out of enough space. Then the other thing is with Mercedes-Benz is the announcement of their CEO that they're trying to get out of the gasoline and diesel engine, the carbon-powered systems basically completely, and only do electric vehicles. If that should materialize, then they probably also going to completely close out all of the spare parts, even the ones they're still making today, replacement parts for all the gasoline and diesel related vehicles, whether it's going to be trucks, buses, military vehicles, or anything. It's going to be all gone. If this is going to come or not, we don't know. We just don't know at this point. So the other part in this here is going to start now, and I'm going to show you one on the Bosch websites of what you can find, how you can find this with your VIN number, and then you can actually look at this, either the model year and model type, manufacturer, and all of that stuff. And you can look exactly at what parts are available and what parts are not available, when they have been discontinued, if you want to know that, for how long, because that will give you an idea if there's any, units floating around somewhere in workshops or anything else apart, like with the EZL unit, which was discontinued 2003. This is now 21 years ago. 20 years this year, 21 years here shortly. We're going to be in 2024. They're going to be gone, and you won't be able to get any, whether they sit on the shelf at Mercedes-Benz or somewhere else. The chances of getting one brand new or new in box, so to speak, even though with years and years or decades of shelf life on it, sitting on a shelf, is probably highly unlikely. And now this has rippled into the alternators. The AL69X I got was available until 2 or 3 years ago. Autoplicity had 16 listed in inventory. When I bought the one I just bought a week ago, was Sunday a week ago. It is now at 15. So if you want to keep your car running, then I would probably start stockpiling these type of parts, which they have been discontinued. You have verified on the Bosch website that they have been discontinued. That means there will be no longer these things, unless it is some Chinese thing, which may work or may not work. And then you can buy it now and put it on the shelf. If it is in an air-conditioned, dust-controlled environment in your house, it will last a lot longer than in a garage or in a barn somewhere. I can tell you that right off the end. And that would apply to a starter. Well, the starter is easier to rebuild, but that would be the power steering pump, the SLS pump. That would be the alternator in this case. These kind of parts, the SLS steering leveling unit itself, which hooks up to the rear suspension. Those things, the shocks from Fichtel and Sachs, are no longer available either for the SLS system, for the 126 vehicles. So for the 560 SEC and for the 560 SEL, like the one I have, they're no longer available. In 2005, when I had the other 560 SEL, I was able to buy them either from Mercedes-Benz, Fichtel and Sachs, or aftermarket, depending on how much money I wanted to spend. Now, neither one of them are available. The same thing is going to be with the hydraulic hoses, which go in between these units. This kind of stuff is going to fade out more and more and more, and it depends on how authentic you want to keep your car running. That's the big question. I guess you as the owner will know better than I am of what you may need and what you not need, and when parts were replaced. So taking an inventory on your vehicle of what's in there right now, if you can get to the seals and the labels and stuff like this, you can hopefully look up the dates this was manufactured versus the mileage and the overall condition of the vehicle, and the vehicle is stored inside, outside, garage, non-garage, air-conditioned garage, and that sort of stuff. Will give you an idea of when you will have to replace these parts. If you believe that this car is never going to break, then you're very optimistic. There's a reality in this, and that means it is most likely going to break, even if it is a Mercedes-Benz, and it will wear out. It will take longer, but the age and the age of time, or the how do you say this? The time is chewing away your parts in there, even with not driving the vehicle. Engine mounts collapse from just getting old. You don't even have to drive the engine; it will just collapse on you. You can have a brand new car with 100 miles on it. A car has never been driven on the road. If you let that sit, that thing is going to deteriorate in a blink of an eye, even in fully air-conditioned systems. The brake hoses are going to go out. The flex discs on your drive shaft are going to go out. You don't even have to turn the car on. All of these parts are going to deteriorate just from sitting. So with this, we're going on to part number 2. I would think that will take a little while too, so this is a long video. But for me, at this point here, I would say thank you for having watched to this point.